Hey everybody, this is Zachary Jeans. Let's keep walking through the Bible. So today is day 363, and we are working our way through the book of Exodus. We are in the last chapters of the book of Exodus, and I had intended yesterday to kind of go through a good chunk and maybe even wrap up, because some of it is fairly tedious. It's in terms of the actual statements about like what to make and what to do, and then Moses, after he lists all that out, and it's really good stuff. It's very detailed oriented stuff to go through. However, it then repeats, like, here's what Moses actually did. And it repeats, he did this, he did that, he did this, he did that in the setting up. And of course, it's foundational. It's an important section of text. God would not have put it here if it wasn't. It just is more important for the people who actually set up the temple, or at first the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, and then eventually the temple that was built, first, second temples. And at some point, prophecy suggests there will be a third temple. So I say that to digress, and I'm not making any promises, but today, Lord willing, we are going to probably get to the end of the book of Exodus. Now, I have an interesting thing to share with you. So yesterday, I was so troubled by my teaching. And you're like, why? Why were you troubled? I was troubled because I had this moment in teaching about the tent of meeting where Moses had gone outside of camp and he would meet with the Lord there, or the Lord rather would meet with him. And in that moment, my recollection of what I've always understood the tent of meeting that preceded the building of the tent of meeting, that is the tabernacle, with, the altars and whatnot, I got confused in the middle of teaching. It's kind of embarrassing for me. Now, it'd be one thing if I'd never read this section of the Bible, but I've read it many times. I believe I've written this entire section out by hand at least more than once, studied it, heard sermons on it, and I had this moment of doubt. I was like, wait a minute, is this a preceding of the... And so today I spent some time in the commentary and reflecting on it. And the reason why I was confused is because I have studied this. There are multiple schools of thought here. So let me just outline them real quickly, and then we'll pray and we'll get into our passage today. So one school of thought is that it is in fact the tabernacle. It is the tent and outer court and whatnot that Moses is going to go on to describe here in detail in chapters after chapter 34. And that this is a point of the story in which he's just describing, hey, this is what would happen on the regular. And then he goes into describing the temple and the sanctification of Aaron and his sons. And then we'll go on to finish the book of Exodus. So it's a story formatting issue for some. Others believe that this tent is in fact the tent that is separated away from the camp, that it is where Moses would go out to, and it is perhaps even the tent which his father-in-law, Joseph of Midian, would come on out to meet him and bring his family, when they're out there in the desert. So this is perhaps the tent that they went into and were separated out and away from the people because of the conversation there about how the people would come to Moses to receive judgment. And as described in chapter 33, we find out that the Lord would meet with Moses and he would render judgments and whatnot for the people. There are some that believe that this is a pre-rudimentary version of the tabernacle based on Moses' conversations and meetings with the Lord. And so yesterday when I was teaching, I was like, my initial and firm belief had been that this was a pre-version of the tabernacle, but not with all of its elements. In other words, there's not the show table, there's not like a full-on altar and this and that in there. There's probably some lampstands, but maybe not exactly to the specification, right? They were probably there for light. So that had been my reading of it. And in further review, I tend to think that that is actually the case. I think that this is the tent where Moses had separated it out from the camp. The Lord had asked him to put this there. That would be my assumption, because the Lord doesn't come into the camp. The Lord meets with Moses outside of the camp. And lest, His Holiness break out upon the sinful, rebellious people that he's attempting to redeem. Okay? So that's what I think. And I think that this is not the actual tabernacle as described in the chapters after chapter 34 here. So just to sum up, special place, God set it up, or not physically, but told Moses, meet with me out here. And then it precedes the actual building of what would be the tabernacle. All right, so hope that's clear. Why don't we stop? Let's pray. Lord, I love you. God, thanks for having mercy on me and my memory, and also my own confusion about things that I thought I had all straightened out in my head. And I just love that you're continuing to teach me and humble me in front of the people that I'm trying to teach. I love you, and you're so good. So, Lord, please meet with me. Please meet with me, and meet with these that are taking time to get in your word. And we just give you this wonderful time in Exodus. It is wonderful. I say that because a lot of us can get drugged down in the details. And Lord, I want to honor you and not dishonor your word, but also recognize that those that are taking time to get in your word, they aren't sacrificing in your altars anymore. That you have already done that, Jesus. You've presented yourself, and you are our sacrifice, and you are high priest, and you are everything that we need. And so, Lord, we just receive that, and we say thank you, and we just give you this time. Amen. All right, well, why don't we open up chapter 34, verse 1. We're going to get back into these tablets, and I've already referenced them, but I do want to start back at chapter 34, verse 1, and kind of go that direction. We won't get word for word here, but we're just going to touch upon the top level points, okay? So the first point is that Moses makes new tablets, and then the Lord, writes on them. So verse 34, or chapter 34, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I'll write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke, Moses, right? He crushed them up, and yeah. So be ready by the morning, and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself there to me on top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds graze opposite that mountain. Okay, very clear instructions. Come up solo. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and he rose up early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Interesting. The Lord said he would proclaim his name before him. He would go before him and proclaim his name. And his name is the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and so forth, but who will by no means clear the guilty, who in fact visit the iniquity of the fathers on generations past or going forward. And this is the name of the Lord. So a lot of people wonder, they're like, wait a minute, isn't God love? And then all the passages which say that God is just and a bringer of judgment. And they're like, how can that be? Well, because you have a naive view of love. And also, it's because we have a naive view of justice. That is to say that we have a limited and also biased view of what love and justice is. We can experience both love and justice for others in this world with our very limited view. I was just chatting with a guy who works at a public works organization in a large city. And this person 5 years ago said, admittedly so, that his views today do not represent and would have horrified himself had he heard them 5 years prior. But his experience in working in his role, a fairly senior level role, in a public works organization that has contact with a broad spectrum of the city and deals with the drugs and the crime and the houselessness across that city, his views have changed, and he believes, through much trial of his own soul and coming to wrestle with these issues, that there needs to be a much more severe and immediate act of justice performed in regards to those who violate and commit crimes, especially at the street level. And this is a person, trust me, who would know. This is a person who deals in this world. And he told me that had he told himself these points of view 5 years younger, he would have been aghast. He would have been shocked, disagreed, would have been angry with himself or this person that was presenting his views as of today. And he would have appealed to more of a sense of love and grace and mercy, a greater sense of patience. But over time, he came to realize that those expressions of patience did not, in fact, aid in protecting those people that he saw his role being responsible for engaging. And it did not, in fact, help or change the trajectory of the people that were committing those crimes at the street level. What he has seen work, not through his organization, but on the ground through just anecdotal knowledge, is that, and perhaps it wasn't even legal, but when there was a immediate response to those people creating those crimes, those people in their drug-induced psychotic state understood the pain of immediate retribution. And so he, being in a public works situation, totally understands that is likely not to happen from a government point of view. And he understands the deeply challenging position that would put a government works organization or any level of government in, to have to remit that kind of force on a society that is in criminal and oftentimes violent action against people. He doesn't know what else will actually fix it. So I tell that anecdotal story, that story about somebody I've talked with. And I don't know how to reach that person. It's just somebody I met and had a conversation with. And he was able to be candid because no one else was listening, right? It's amazing what people tell you when they know that they have the the freedom, and the conversation doesn't have to be in any way recorded. And I have done what I can to, in fact, not disclose what organization that person had worked at. Justice does, in fact, have a merciful quality. And so when justice occurs, it comes from a place that is first, if you notice, a God who is gracious, God who is faithful. And then comes justice. So we don't start with here is the rule, you broke the rule, here is justice. And after justice, now I'll apply grace and mercy. It starts with grace and mercy. And it extends that patience. But when that patience is surpassed to a point where the person or group of people, in this case Israel, refuses to repent, or in the case of those that they're going to dispose or displace, the Amorites, Hittites, Jebusites, and whatnot, they've had hundreds and hundreds of years in that land and have rebelled and done horrific acts that God will in fact use a rebellious people to displace another rebellious people in an act of justice. So just a note on that God's name is more than twofold, but here displayed in two clear tree branches off the one whole. Grace and justice, right? So, verse 10, and he said, behold, I am making a covenant before all your people. I'll do marvels such as not have been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord. For it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Observe that I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Take care, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, lest it become a snare in your midst. God sending them as the sword to render his judgment on these people. And it's going to be a temptation for Israel to not want to engage in that conflict and take the risk of that conflict. It is going to be temptation to not take advantage of the things in which those peoples have. Their female people, the women taking advantage of the trade opportunities. And God will go so far as to say that they could be ensnared into worshiping little gods and not the Lord, and violating, of course, the first and great commandment. Thou shalt not have a God before me. So let's come down and he will repeat the commandments, and we'll come down to verse 29. Okay. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he had been talking with God. Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. Afterward, all the people of Israel came near, and he commanded them all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. Whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel what was commanded, the people of Israel would see that the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face was shining. And Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went in to speak with him. Okay, so the way that Hebrew is translated, and I haven't done an exhaustive study, but it is as though there were like horns of light coming out from his face. Literally, horns of light. So shafts, horns of light. And I just want to draw your attention to Revelation chapter, well, I think it's chapter 1, but let me just double check here. So if you want to flip over there, you're welcome to. I just want to read a quick explanation of what John saw when he met the Lord, okay? So, flipping over here. All right, here we go. Then I turned, verse 12 of chapter 1. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp two-edged sword, and catch this, and his face was like the sun, shining in full strength. Now, when Moses met with the Lord, he met with the Lord. That is the expression of his person in and through a pre-incarnate Jesus, the Christ. I believe this is what he met with. This is the person he met with. Now, there is research that discusses when we engage in relationship with other people, the constituent parts of ourselves that isn't physical but electromagnetic, the parts and pieces of us that express itself, right? Not just not like in a physical voice, the vibration of the sound that comes from our body, but those things in which those intentions, thoughts, emotions, which are carried within ourself, they've measured and shown that they actually express and engage with the environment around us. So much so that they've actually measured plants and how they can actually respond to a person's intentions, to whether to speak kindly to them or sing to them, or with the threat of burning a plant. They can actually show an actual response. This is all stuff that's been studied decades and decades ago. But they've also measured I don't know what the right word is here, are like kind of, if you want to think about it, electromagnetic or our expression of ourself out several feet. If not, I think the last study I heard reflected upon by a couple people suggested it was like 22 feet of range just in a natural effort. And you're like, whoa, that's new agey. No. I'm not talking about anything new agey here. I'm talking about the actual physical, quantum physical science behind us, the electromagnetic, this stuff that you can't see with these eyeballs, but is in fact occurring all around us, in and through us, right? You can't see every bit of radiation the sun is emitting on us just through the light spectrum, right? Our brains are doing its level best to interpret that through the eyeballs, rods and cones, and then tell us what's happening. There's a whole spectrum of reality that's going on all the time. We know that, right? You can't see the radio waves that are pulsating through this room, but nonetheless, they are pulsating through the room, okay, from radio stations all over, let alone, astrological, things out in the stars, okay? So we are entities that are complex, right? That's fair. And that the Bible talks about us of having a soul and a spirit, and that the word of God can divide between it, joint and marrow, right? Between our very soul and spirit. So there are complexities in us, and we're just beginning to be able to measure some of this stuff. And I bring all that back to talk about this entanglement that occurs, which is actual relationship that occurs between people, right? Our thoughts, our emotions, our intentions that can be felt by plants and by other people. Some people are more sensitive to that stuff. Some people aren't, but it's occurring, right? And we're starting to measure that. And what I want to propose to you here is that when Moses met with this one who John describes, Jesus, right? But not the humble carpenter shuffling around the desert, right? But the glorified expression of God as a person, and his face being a light as though the sun, and his eyes being that much brighter. And as Moses met with this one, over time, that entanglement of person, right, the engagement of relationship back and forth, the conversant back and forth, intentions and thoughts and ideas being expressed between the two, the lasting impact obviously was left here. And as a result of that wonderful engagement, it wasn't just that he had a bright countenance, right? That he wasn't just full of the Lord, which he was, right? It wasn't just that, but some impartation of God's expressive glory as seen by the human mind through the eyeballs as light. And it says like horns of light coming out, shards of light coming out from Moses's face. So much so that it freaked people out that he had to put a veil over his face. And that didn't stop the light from existing. That just prevented them from not being freaked out, right? So, and maybe that's what I'm doing here by sharing some of this information. I'm revealing a little too much light about reality, and you're like, that's too freaky for me, Zach. Stop it. Why can't you just, give me the Sunday school version? Well, there's lots of Sunday school versions. I would encourage you, there are great Bible teachers that really break down and yet still provide depth and clarity. The Bible Project. Go to the Bible Project. Great. I'm not endorsing every aspect of their theology. I don't know all their theology. Go look at the Bible Project. Watch their videos. Okay. I tend to incorporate some more concepts outside that we're learning about reality and try to help us understand what may be going on here. And what I think is going on here is the same thing which God talks about, why we are not to have sex with a bunch of people, because when we enjoin ourselves to them, we are knitting our literal souls together, right? And then when you stop that and you rip it apart, there's actual damage, not physical damage. So sometimes it expresses itself through verbal anger, right? And in horrible situations, physical between the two people. When you pull that relationship apart and they're trying to deal with their broken relationship and it's coming back together and breaking and coming back together and breaking. But if you want to think of it as the tearing of a muscle or a ligament, right, that's been joined together through a physical union, which does more than just an orgasm, right? It does way more than just a passionate feelings that come with sex. It's an actual knitting together of the souls, and it's ripping that fabric apart as the two souls are intertwining. Now, in our relationships, all of our relationships are a form of entangling, quantum entanglement, if you will, soul entanglement. And when you knit them together in love, compassion, grace, and occasionally justice, right, has its own impact. All of that is a knitting together. And so when you have a right relationship with the Lord, and you're knit together in a conversation and a learning and a divulging of who the Lord is by the power of God's Spirit that lives and dwells within this tent, right? Once you have that engagement of faith and you engage, God begins to unveil more and more of himself to you. Then that entanglement becomes more and more apparent in your person, and you begin to shine out who God is more and more through the veil of this person, yourself. And as people, those who know the Lord, see the Lord in you, it magnifies at a greater level. And those who don't know that Lord and don't have God dwelling within them, see God in you. And it makes them sense their lack of having their creator, who they are separated from, which is a whole nother conversation about the emotions and the feelings that may come around from that. But hopefully the greatest emotion that eventually will surface in them is a hunger and a desire to have that which they know now that they don't have, because they've had a taste or an experience of God in and through your life. But I also want to contend or commend, I think contend would be an argument. I want to advise to you that there is wisdom in the veil that Moses places over his face. When you walk into a room, let's say a holiday party or, a coffee shop, what's the decorum of the room? What's the tone and level of conversation? Are you free to just shout? Of course. I mean, until somebody shuts you up, right? You can shout anything. Rip City, right? Go Blazers. Like, we're in a library. Shh, right? If you go into a bar, a sports bar, and the Blazers score, and everybody's there watching the Blazer game on the big TVs, and they're all talking and like watching the game, and then they score a winning bucket, and everybody screams out, and it's like, Rip City, like, go, different than at a funeral where you do the same behavior, right? So there's a decorum. So what I would suggest to you is that Moses is using wisdom here in order to best level communicate with the people who don't have that intimacy of relationship with the Lord. Now, that's on you to decide. Are you John the Baptist crying out in the wilderness? Is that what God's called you to? If it is, it is. Okay. I would suggest to you that with the gospel, it's not purely, well, they'll see my things I do and they'll just know that I know the Lord. Well, no, the gospel does have more than just doing. Okay. Handing out peanut butter and jelly sandwiches is not the gospel. I once heard a really smart, kind-hearted Christian leader advocate that the gospel, he held up this lunch bag that we had gone and handed out and told us that was in fact the gospel. And it's not. It's a perversion of the gospel, largely by Marxist concepts, okay? It's a hijacking of the church and the truth. There has to be an actual expression of who God is, who Jesus is, our nature, sinful rebellion against God. God provided a solution, and that we can, in fact, trust ourselves to him and be saved. That's the good news. Now, that can be done with a sandwich. It doesn't have to be done in every conversation. Many sandwiches can be given. Okay, many acts of love can be produced. They can see the testimony of God's life in you. But seeing it, just like seeing a beautiful mountain declaring God's glory, or a starscape declaring his glory, or hearing animals waking up in the morning and chirping and waking to the new day is a beautiful thing. All these things declaring God's glory don't contain within it the actual message of the gospel. So when is it appropriate to share? Well, it takes discernment, right? When do you lift the veil fully and declare, situation by situation, moment by moment, ask the Lord for his guidance? So I think that's where we're going to stop today. Again, I always think we're going to get farther, but I feel like chapter 34 stands on its own here. And we're going to go ahead and close. Just want to say thank you. Please continue to pray for me. Pray for what we're doing here. Please pray that God will guide and use me the way I'm supposed to be used. And I just lay all this at his feet. I hope you do too. So keep walking. That's the key. Whether you stumble a little bit like I did yesterday, trying to figure out what I was talking about at the tenant meeting or not, right? Keep walking. All right? God bless you. Bye-bye.